A stop that did not have a name. A timetable that used only the phrase, "when the hour is longer than it should be." There was a sketch of a platform that looked exactly like the back entrance to a station that had been renovated out of its accent. There was a notation in a margin made by a pen that still remembered the hand that held it. "She will stand under the broken bulb and pretend to be brave until you arrive." The mother's daughter had described a broken bulb. I copied what I could without dragging the paper's breath out of it. If you take too much from a page in the archive, the ink goes brown in front of you, the letters cracking like old paint. I wrote the way you write when you love the person who will read it, and you know you will have to look them in the eye. I put the blank on the table. The librarian moved her hand above it, and the words aligned with something I couldn't see. Like iron filings jumping to attention for the magnet you pretend isn't there. "Go," she said. "Trains hate people who are late, even when they are the ones bending the clock." Back outside, the city was wearing an extra hour like a borrowed coat. The light did not know whether to be street light or moon. The station's back entrance smelled like all back entrances, oxygen that has been told it is unimportant. Inside, the renovation had done its confident work. Clean lines, bright screens, a banishment of shadows that felt like an insult. But if you have lived in a place, you know where it has kept its old face. There it was, a forgotten corridor where the tiles still had a pattern that meant handmade, where the ceiling was lower because people were shorter or humility was taller. The platform. A bulb that had broken long ago and had never been high enough priority to replace because no one important complained. A woman standing under it pretending to be brave. She looked nothing like her mother and exactly like her. That happens when grief has done its middle work. "You came," she said, as if there had been doubt. There is always doubt. That's why trains exist. We did not talk. Talking in front of doors confuses them. We stood and listened for a sound that I have only ever heard in two places. In old films, when someone hugs someone at a station and the world agrees. And in kitchens, when someone finally says the thing that allows the refrigerator to start humming again. It is the sound of a system remembering how to be one system. The train did not announce itself with romance. No steam, no heroic squeal. It arrived like a fact. 6 cars tonight. The paint was the color of good intention. The windows held the past the way a lake holds the sky. The doors sighed open, and the platform did the thing platforms do when they are used correctly. They remembered what they're for. The conductor looked like a person who has stood politely in worse weather. They did not wear a hat because authority does not always need a hat. "Tickets," they said, with the kind of accent that cannot be placed without insulting it. We had nothing that would impress a machine. We had the object. The daughter took it from her pocket, a strip of paper so thin the word paper is flattery. On it, a name repeated 3 times, each repetition less careful than the last. "Good," the conductor said. They did not smile. They do not smile often. Their job is wait. We sat. The seats were that era's seat. 2 that made you sit too close for comfort if comfort was what you shouldn't have. 1 that made you reach if reaching was the point. The lights in the car did not make sense by any standard I trust, but they were honest. The car smelled like the inside of a history book on a warm day. The people on board were doing the thing people do on trains when they have not decided what to do with each other yet, pretending they were alone. I have done this enough times to know not to narrate. Trains do not need a chorus, but I will tell you this. When the doors closed, the city outside did not blur, it waited. The rails remembered a route they had not traveled since the last time went wrong. We moved with a mercy that made me want to promise something to someone and mean it. The daughter held the strip of paper as if it might disintegrate into the air and take her with it. She lifted it once, lowered it, breathed into it like it was a stubborn coal that might be coaxed into telling the truth. She did not cry. Crying is useful sometimes. Sometimes it is a way to keep from saying the thing that would change your life. At the third stop, there is always a third stop, we stood. The door opened onto a platform I had never seen during legitimate hours. Brick, dark, a sign with letters painted on wood by a person who would have made a beautiful forger if they had been worse. We stepped onto a tile that knew it had been stepped on by this exact set of bones once before, years ago, when the mother had been a woman who had been told not to be brave and had been brave anyway. The air had the weight of before. The daughter reached without a plan. That is how most truths are recovered. A hand, a reach, a world deciding not to punish. She handed the strip of paper to a man who looked exactly like the word checkpoint, if you say it gently. He had the look of someone who had disappointed himself more than he had disappointed others and had not forgiven either. He took the paper as if the paper had forgiven him. He read the name twice. He stamped the air above it. He did not smile. He did not have to. He had chosen not to be a villain this time. That is enough for some lifetimes. When we sat again, the car was warmer, or we were. The conductor lifted their chin toward the far end of the car. Library, they said, meaning the back 3 seats where people store the words they won't say yet. The daughter went. She took out the blank I had carried and placed it on the table. The paper breathed. The pen I handed her was too heavy because it had history in it. She wrote the thing that would let the baby sleep. If you think this is sentimental, you have never been on a train that runs between hours. When the city was ready to forgive the experiment it had allowed itself, the train stopped in the place we had started. The platform wore itself like a memory. The bulb was still broken. The daughter hugged me the way people hug people who have done a thing that cannot be paid for with money. She left with the blank in her bag, the story inside it, an engine the size of a bedtime. I went back to the archive because doors are how I make sense of sleep. The clock said 26:57. 3 minutes left before the world remembered that modesty is easier than miracles. I placed the file back where it had asked to be placed. The librarian watched with a face that meant, "You did not embarrass us." In this building, that is praise enough to salt a life. You know what the worst thing is? I asked her because sometimes I am still 19. The hours we get are the hours we need. We could make so much out there if they would let us have 27 every night. We could fix things. She lifted one hand and the light behaved. If people had 27 hours every night, she said, they would invent a 28th to avoid doing their heart's work. She has a way of letting a sentence be an anvil and a pillow in the same breath. Miracles are effective because they are rare. Doors work because you have to knock. The lights dimmed by a degree no electrician has ever measured. A book somewhere put itself away. The building leaned, almost imperceptibly, toward not being. Go, the librarian said. Nobody respects a guest who doesn't know how to say goodnight. Outside, 26:59 chose Zaup Roro without bruising either. The street had the relief of a child climbing into bed after thunder. The city was smaller because it had survived, larger because it had admitted it could do a trick. My phone did not chirp because the part of the world that chirps had not been invited. The baby somewhere blinked at a ceiling and learned what safety sounds like when it is spelled. In the days after a 27th hour, small inaccuracies correct themselves. 2 estranged brothers reach for the same jar in a grocery aisle and do not fight. An elevator that has trapped the same woman 3 Wednesdays in a row remembers that it was built to carry. A judge writes an opinion that includes a sentence that makes a paralegal cry. Not because it is harsh, but because it is honest. Nothing that can be quantified, everything that can be lived with. When you tell people about this, if you choose to, they will ask for proof. Proof is the word we use when we want to be right in front of other people. Evidence is the word for when we want to be right in front of ourselves. I have evidence. I have a blank that is no longer blank. I have a key with a warmth that comes from being held by the same hands for more than 1 century. I have a map of a platform that does not exist when the morning traffic report is on. I have the look in a daughter's eyes that makes me believe that trains can run through walls if the timetable says they should. And that time is kinder when you don't bully it with certainty. Months later, the city bent again. 24-0-2401, a text. Doors at 2411, it said. Bring blank. I went because that is what I do when the world is brave. The building had a new crack that was an old crack. The librarian nodded the way Alps nod when clouds remember their shapes. Tonight, she said, we are filing something for the ocean. Let me guess, I said, because I am still a tourist sometimes. A lighthouse? She did not smile. A promise, she said. We file promises on Tuesdays. I would tell you more, but I have learned the other rule. A door that is over-explained cracks. This is enough for now. When the hour is longer than it should be, there is a building that borrows itself from whatever dares to be real. The archive of the 27th hour, it starts the way most forbidden things start, with a clock doing something it shouldn't. Not a glitch, not a dead battery. A healthy, humming city clock, municipal, smug, regulated by a time server that talks to satellites like old friends, rolls past 2359, blinks, and instead of resetting to 0000 like a civilized mechanism, it coughs up 24 cow, then 2401, then 2402. If you were outside that night, you felt it even if you didn't look up. The traffic softened the way a street quiets for falling snow. The air tasted undecided, as if it hadn't made up its mind about being yesterday's end or tomorrow's beginning. Somewhere a cafe left its lights on because the barista could not remember whether to lock up. Somewhere a hospital monitor added a phantom hour to a patient's chart and no alarm fired because the machine had not been taught that reality could do this. It happens in some cities sometimes. No pattern that the clever have been able to corner. No calendar that has earned a prophecy. It is always an ordinary weeknight. Always after a sports score you will forget, always after a fight that will still matter in the morning. And it never lasts the same. Sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. Sometimes, as it did the year I learned how to listen, a full 3. A night with 27 hours. We are professional listeners. That's what archivists are, regardless of what the job posting says. We stand next to time the way librarians stand next to fire. Respectfully, with little metal tools, aware we will smell like it later. So when the city rolled into 24 Han with the shamelessness of a drunk uncle telling the right joke at the wrong table, my phone chirped the way it does when we're needed. A short text with a longer inheritance behind it. Doors at 2415, bring blank. People think archives are paper and dust. They are wrong. Archives are doors. The paper is just what we bring home through them. I pack the blanks, 3 of them, the heaviest kind of empty, notebooks with paper so soft the first line feels like a sin. I took the brass key, worn smooth by hands that have been dead 100 years and will be dead 100 more. I put on the jacket we all wear on nights like this, the color of something that cannot be described without lying a little. I stepped into streets that were learning how to breathe at a strange tempo. I don't tell you the building's first address because this isn't that kind of story. In the hours you get by law, the place does not exist. It doesn't have a footprint, doesn't violate a zoning code, doesn't appear in the list of structures the fire department will visit if you cry. But in the 25th hour, it grows like a fact someone had been too afraid to say aloud. Brick by brick, light by light, a seriousness appears. We call it the archive of the 27th hour because once, for 206 minutes, we had 27 hours, and we did not waste them. We went in. We learned its smells. Paper and a deeper thing like the first page of a heavy book that hasn't been opened in decades. We learned its blind corners, and we learned that it does not love us. It tolerates us because we are useful. It has no ego. It has rules. You do not run in the stacks. You do not write in ink unless the book asks you to. You do not ask the same question twice. I reached the door at 24:12. 3 minutes early is on time when your host is the exception that proves all clocks. The door looked older than the building. The wood matched to nothing around it, the hardware a style that never existed. The brass key fit the way a word fits a mouth. Inside, the lobby was not a lobby. It was a throat. The light had a texture that makes photographers swear, a patient gray that thinks it is a color. There was a desk with no one behind it, and a bell you could ring if you wanted to be told not to. I did not ring. The archive hears you when you inhale. Bring blank, the text had said, and I understood again what I had understood the first night. This place does not hold the past. It lends the future its receipts. The first time I came here, I brought questions like a tourist. Where do you keep the lost languages? Who filed the vanished cities? Do you have a drawer for all the arguments that would have ended differently if someone had listened better? The archive does not hate questions. It hates waste. It will not answer you if the answer would make you worse. Tonight I had a purpose, which is the coin of entry. A woman had come to me with a voice that didn't match her face. Her vowels were older than the rest of her. Her mother had died without telling the story that had built the hinge of their family. An escape, a train. A paper slipped under a door, and now the daughter had a baby whose eyes were asking for a bedtime that wasn't a lie. It doesn't have to be my mother's exact words, she said, but it has to be the truth, not the official one. The one we lived. We don't do people, usually. That's the public library's job. Genealogies and photos of handsome uncles on days before the drink took them. The archive of the 27th hour has no patience for small personal catastrophes. But sometimes a family's story is a country's story wearing a smaller coat. Sometimes the exact angle at which a woman folded a letter is the key to a border, a war, a law. Sometimes the private truth is the only way to reach the public one without getting lost in speeches. So I was here to borrow a door. To find the drawer labeled with an event nobody admits. To copy the day until its edges stopped lying. I walked past the catalog, which catalogs nothing by name and everything by intention. A wall of drawers that open themselves if you deserve them. That stick if you don't. I've seen scholars with lives of Latin behind them reduced to heat-shiny foreheads by a drawer that knew they were treating it like a trophy case. I have seen a janitor who came to return a pen open a compartment that gave him a map that saved a neighborhood. The archive does not care about your credentials. It cares whether you will carry the weight it hands you without writing a book about how strong you are. I found what I had been given to find, a thin, stubborn file whose tab said, Transit Unscheduled Borderless. Someone had typed on a machine that wanted to be a piano. The paper had the softness of something that forgives. I slid the file under my arm. I felt the relief of being believed. Upstairs, the reading room was full of people who weren't there. A mathematician who had spent 20 years proving a theorem that mattered to 6 other mathematicians and 2 satellites was holding a document that made her knees repeat their childhood. A cook who had fled 2 dictatorships and 1 celebrity chef cried on a ledger that listed spices in a language that had been punished. A city councilman who had never read anything longer than a campaign donation list while sober was asleep with a pamphlet on his chest, the pamphlet breathing the way paper breathes when it knows it is home. The clocks on the wall said 24:21 in a dozen faces. Roman, digital, hands with no numbers, numbers with no hands. There is a librarian in the archive, but not like the kind who will recommend novels because you look tired. This one is a person only in the sense that a lighthouse is a person. You don't see her unless you look wrong. When she puts a book down, the table thanks her by becoming level. When she looks at you, the lie in your hand hisses. In the seconds when I think I know her, She looks like a woman I met on a train when I was 19 who taught me that good questions are warmer than good answers. Other nights she looks like my neighbor's grandfather who told stories about a bridge that never fell because it knew the river's name. She was at the far table, arranging the light so that people could understand things they'd been pretending to understand for years. "Blank?" she said without looking. I held up the notebooks. "Good," she said. "Write only what makes a bruise when you stop reading. Leave the rest alone. That's the other rule here. Do not copy pain that isn't yours if all you want is to feel interesting." I opened the file. A train. Not metaphor? Steel and wood and coal when it felt like it. Electricity when it didn't. 6 cars, sometimes 8. Never announced on any board, never logged by any civil servant who didn't lose their job in the next reorganization. It runs when the city is honest enough to let itself have more night than it paid for. It appears on tracks that remember it, regardless of what the map says now. It stops where someone needs to leave without conquering, arrive without deserving, cross a border without inventing one. The file was not a story. It was a way to behave in the presence of a story. There were pages about how to board. Do not run. The train notices greed the way dogs notice intention, who to ask for. No one wears a uniform. But one person will look like they are the only person who is not surprised to see you. How to sit. Alone if you think you should not be forgiven. Together if you are certain you should be. What to bring. A small object with the weight of your mistake, and what to leave behind. Forgiveness you haven't earned yet. There were logs of fares paid by currencies that never circulated. A song hummed into a conductor's sleeve. A letter finished on the back of a ration card. A button with the crest of a school that had renamed itself 3 times to keep its students. There were diagrams of how the cars shifted to fit the era they served. Wooden benches for 1942, plastic insult for 1987, seats like confessionals for the year someone needed to say out loud that he had been wrong. And there, in a section that the page resisted until I pressed it with the kind of patience my grandmother taught me for peeling boiled eggs, was the route I needed. Inside is an archive that does not hoard, that does not gloat, that does not sell postcards. It keeps the receipts of the future. It lends them to those who can bear them. It lets trains run between mistakes. It teaches clocks to be generous without becoming liars. If you get the text, come. Bring blank. Write only what hurts when you stop reading. Leave the rest on the table for someone who needs it more. And when you go back into the night that has agreed to be ordinary again, do the thing that the archivist cannot do for you. Keep your promises, because that is how we earn the 27th hour the next time the city remembers it is allowed.